Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this lunchtime Faiths United and Faiths Forum for London webinar. I'm Zaki Cooper from Faiths United. We were set up 7 weeks ago to bring together faith communities in response to COVID. Every week, we bring together 27 faith leaders from 9 different religions and faith communities on a call, and we also have a Faiths United youth network. As well as organising webinars and events such as these, we do communications, public affairs, and initiate interfaith projects. So on to today's Pandemic and Prejudice webinar. Since the crisis started, we've seen the best of humanity, the bravery of key workers, the generosity of people, and millions of acts of kindness all over the country. But we've also seen the ugly side of humanity with prejudice, scapegoating, and hatred, both online and in person, particularly pre-lockdown. We know from history that significant events like recessions or a pandemic such as this often bring a rise in prejudice. The purpose of today's webinar is to learn more about how some communities have been affected. We have an excellent panel of 5 speakers. We're not able to cover off every community, but hope that today's webinar both educates and informs, and also leads to alliances and action. So now over to Dr. Cormack Hollingsworth, the Chair of Trustees of Hope Not Hate, who will be chairing today's webinar.
Hi, good afternoon, colleagues and friends. So my name is Cormack Hollingsworth. I am Chair of Trustees of Hope Not Hate Charitable Trust, who some of you may be familiar with. I myself am a Catholic by confession, and it's a real privilege to be here talking to you all and sharing this meeting today. I think, first of all, thanks to Zaki and the teams in both Faith Forum for London and Faiths United for organising this. As Zaki said, we have a set of people who I'll just introduce to you now, who are speaking about the experiences of the various communities, but of course we won't cover everybody, and I just to sort of mark one person in particular who's really struck me, just how broad the way this is crisscrossing in terms of hate, is the tragic death of Beli Mujunga, who was working as a Thameslink worker, a TSSA member, who was spat at on the concourse of Victoria Station at the end of March, and by someone who told her that they had coronavirus, and then she sadly died from the virus. And I think this just crisscrosses all over our society, and we're all coming here first of all to learn and understand and empathise, but also to think about what we can all do together within our own faith, and then across faiths and in the UK more broadly. So we have Sarah Owen, who's the MP for Luton North, and she was welcomed into the House of Commons in December as the first female MP of Chinese heritage. We're really pleased to have her here. It's quite busy in Parliament at the moment, and they're adopting 21st century technology and giving people maternity leave and things that we all sort of enjoy if we're fortunate to. So really terrific that she's here this afternoon. Then joining her is Mark Gardner, who's the Communications Director of Community Security Trust. Haidar, Lapcha, the Director of Integrity UK, Bhaven Pathak, the Director of the Yog Foundation, and finally we will hear from Jemma Levene, who's the Deputy Director of Hope Not Hate Charitable Trust, who will be giving some context in terms of the polling work and the work that we've been working on. So each participant will be speaking for a short while. I think then I would like to just draw out some themes and amongst the participants if we have time, and then finally open up to some questions from you. So thank you all for joining us. Thank you very much to our participants, and thank you also to the organisers. So Sarah, would like to hear from you first, because that's kind of where it all became aware of just the hate that this whole crisis created an opportunity for in the Chinese community.
Thank you so much for inviting me here on this panel to discuss this important issue. And I'm really welcoming the opportunity to be able to raise awareness of just exactly what it is that Chinese and East Asians are facing in the community now during the pandemic, but actually what have always faced in society as well. So I was going to touch on the racism and the spikes in hatred and division, particularly since lockdown and since the pandemic started. Also a bit about how Chinese and East Asians working in the NHS and the care sector are also having difficulties, as well as at the end trying to give us all some steps that we can actually positively take as well from this. So first of all, it's really important to say, I think, that racism and prejudice against Chinese and East Asians in this country is not something new. It is something that we have faced now, but it's always been fairly under the radar in terms of media reporting of it, for example. And I think that that is due to a large underrepresentation of Chinese and East Asians within politics, but also on our mainstream media as well. And that's very different to, say, other countries such as even America or Australia, who have huge representation within the media and also politics. But the increase in racism that we've seen and the types of incidents that we've seen have been really significant since coronavirus first came on the scene. So in the first 3 months alone of this year, we saw over 260 reported incidents of hate crimes against Chinese and East Asians. Now that includes everything from takeaway owners being spat at, racist graffiti daubed on walls of Chinese residents in the UK. We had incidents of children feeling ostracized when schools were still sitting, and also verbal and physical abuse that we saw in of the Singaporean guy in Chinatown. And my fear is that during the lockdown easing, I really fear that we might see another spike of racist attacks against Chinese and East Asians, particularly as the conversation shifts from how do we deal with the immediate crisis to who is to blame and who was at fault and what steps should have been taken when. And that, I have to say, is all before you get to see what's on the internet. Every time I talk about corona-related racism, or I talk about racism against Chinese and East Asians, online, the abuse that I get and the level of racism is pretty shocking. It's something that I haven't seen since I was, or experienced since I was a child, if I'm honest. I regularly get sent messages with videos of people eating live animals, telling me that it is our fault, blaming an entire nation of people for what is essentially a virus. And I really ask that the social media platforms take this information down quickly, because this isn't just about racism, it's also spreading conspiracy theories as well, which are highly dangerous during a time of crisis such as this. The second issue that I really wanted to talk about was something that has only been raised very recently. And I asked the question at the last Health and Social Care Select Committee, because anecdotally I'd had a number of East Asians, so Filipinos, Malaysian, Chinese nurses, who had raised the issue that the PPE, particularly the FFP3 masks that they rely on to be able to work and work safely, don't fit East Asians, especially people with small faces and our face structures. And when you consider there are tens of thousands of East Asians working in our NHS at the moment on the front line, I think that that is an example where the PPE is designed to fit a big Western male, when actually you've got an NHS and healthcare system which is full of different kinds of people from all corners of the world, 75% of which is female. So what you have there, I think, is an example, a very, very real example of how racism, but also misogyny within the system is actually endangering the lives of the people that are working to save us and get us through this crisis. But I really wanted to focus on some positive things that people could do, because particularly whilst we're in lockdown, it's actually very difficult to see practical examples of what we could do to help, I think, the racism that people are experiencing at the moment. And the first one is be our ally. Please be our ally, because it's an incredibly lonely, isolating, frightening place at the moment for everybody, but especially so if you are East Asian or Chinese right now, because as much as lockdown has been hard, I worry how people of East Asian and Chinese descent are actually going to be safe when it comes to going outside now, as lockdown eases. We've had examples where people have been chucked off buses or been refused to be served in shops. And my fear is, when we see the rhetoric of Donald Trump, for example, how he spoke to Asian American reporters, but also referring to this as a Chinese virus, giving this virus a race and identity, basically. I think it's very important that we have allies in this community, and that we don't feel like that we're fighting it alone. And the second one is language. I think language is incredibly important, particularly in a crisis situation such as this. People are tense, they're anxious, and looking for reasoning behind what's going on. And there is a huge, huge difference between criticising the actions of a state and criticising an entire country and an entire nation of people. And I think that sometimes mainstream media, but particularly politicians from the right of British politics, have slipped into blaming an entire country as opposed to criticising a state. And I think that language during this is incredibly important. Thirdly, I'd say challenge and report. And whenever I've had any of this abuse on Twitter or Facebook, I report it. It's pretty miserable because you have to go through it and see it and acknowledge that it's there, and at times it can be painful. But the more people that do see this and do report it, the better. Again, that goes back to point one of being our ally. Please don't leave us to fight for this on our own. And we really should be seeing much quicker action from Twitter, Facebook and YouTube in taking down this misinformation, but also the racist attacks that happen there. And in terms of sorts of the racist attacks, I mean, I didn't think that in my third month of being an MP, I'd actually have to defend myself to the point of, no, I don't eat fried dogs, for example. I mean, it's been pretty horrific. My pet dog Herman is very much happy and alive, although he's a little bit hot at the moment. But it's challenging in reporting, but Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, they've really got to get a lot quicker in taking down this information. And lastly, I would like to see action from government. I think part of their strategy in terms of easing the lockdown should have been preemptive work and proactive work with charities, organisations, community leaders, as well as the police, to ensure that we do not see another increase, another spike in hate crimes against Chinese and East Asians in any easing of the lockdown. And that should have been part of any plans that they had nationally to do so. So that was kind of a whistle-stop tour of what's happening, but I really wanted to end on a point where people could actually act and support us in a positive way as well.
Thank you. Sarah, how long are you able to stay around with us? I
can stay on, I think, until 2:45. That's okay.
Until 2:45. Okay, terrific. Because I think some of the issues that you've raised and some of the things you've said about government policy, I think probably apply to other communities here as well. So it'd be quite interesting to hear what you think. Okay, thank you so much. It's just appalling what's been happening and the targeting, and especially, as you say, very scary. If you look at someone like Senator Tom Cotton, who is just pushing the China virus and a very nuanced conspiracy theory, and just how this will feature in Trump's re-election campaign is just the potential is really, really scary. But let's move on to our next speaker. So Haidar Lapcha is director of Integrity UK, and it was one of his team that initially came in contact with me. So doing fantastic work there.
Hi, thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you, Sarah, for what you have shared. I would like to speak a little bit about how the coronavirus pandemic has impacted my community, the Muslim community across the UK. Of course, it's deeply unfortunate that Muslims have been systematically targeted by nefarious voices that seek to exploit this particular pandemic across social media, but even beyond social media, it manifests itself in real life, particularly from those on the far right who are exploiting this through a campaign of disinformation, using this as an opportunity to push certain narratives, which aren't new. I mean, the sorts of things that we're seeing as Muslims isn't anything new from these particular voices, because they don't exist in a vacuum. But rather, what we're seeing is the emergence of COVID and Corona as this wedge issue, if you like, which is being used as a useful, or being weaponized almost in a way, to be able to promote conspiracy theories, fake news, and target minority communities, and in much more extreme cases, even call for extreme violence. It's just provided a new context through which hateful narratives can be peddled. And one of the key themes that we've come across in the Muslim community is this nonsense notion that Muslims are not adhering to the lockdown. This is something that is being spread on Telegram, WhatsApp, Facebook, Twitter. There are streams of videos, memes, snippets that are showing Muslims, for example, coming out of mosques or engaging in so-called secret prayers, but they've all been systematically proven as fake. The issue is, by the time it's been proven as fake, the damage has already been done. It's already widespread. It's already caused ripples throughout certain sections of society. You know, some of these examples are, for example, Tel Mama has debunked a claim about a mosque in Wembley. It was tweeted out and went quite viral that that they're breaking the lockdown rules and that they are praying their Friday prayers. This had been retweeted 1,600 times. And then by the time, you know, and it's already caused all sorts of damage. It turns out that this is completely fake, that this had been filmed several weeks prior to it being disseminated on Twitter. And that same mosque in Wembley had actually 6 days before it had even been tweeted, had already announced that they were shutting down all their activities. And this was actually prior to the formal announcement of the lockdown, you know, and this is something that we have seen replicated across so many different accounts and different places. You know, even, you know, Tommy Robinson was showing a group of Muslim men allegedly leaving a secret mosque in inner city Birmingham. You know, it was watched 10,000 times on that platform, and this was dismissed by West Midlands Police. You know, nonsense from people like Gerard Batten, the former UKIP leader, saying that the government is going to be too afraid to close mosques, so mosques are going to remain open. You know, all of these things which are clearly lies, as we'll get to shortly. And this has happened in other regional authorities as well. The West Yorkshire Police have dismissed images showing Muslims allegedly attending Friday prayers. Again, they were taken before the lockdown was announced. And the thing is, I wish that it was only just social media and this sort of dissemination in this very decentralized way. But even we have to hold the traditional press responsible as well for some of the things that they have been peddling. You know, so for example, we see that the Times published an article suggesting that there will be an increase in coronavirus cases due to predicted increase in gatherings during Ramadan, despite social distancing regulations. And this was led with the headline, "Experts fear a spike in UK coronavirus cases during Ramadan." When the Daily Mail journalist Andrew Pearce also put out a concern about the UK coronavirus leading to an increase in cases during Ramadan as well, all of which causes real damage and is unfounded, because in reality, what the Muslim groups and organizations have done have led on demonstrating best practice or good practice during these times. We have the Mosques and Imams National Advisory Board, MINAB, issuing guidance on the 19th of March about social distancing. This is before the lockdown was announced. We had the Muslim Council of Britain doing the same thing, and every week issuing excellent pieces of information and communications about how to engage with your faith during this time and adhering to social distancing rules. And especially now during Ramadan, and I know I'm running out of time, so I'll try to wrap up, but it's Laylatul Qadr. These are the holiest nights of the year in the Islamic calendar. And what we've seen is mosques, Islamic organizations and groups adopting technology, Zoom, Facebook Live, Instagram, YouTube, to be able to host services online, a time in which Muslims at this time of the year would be gathering in mosques, in communal prayer, communal iftars, and instead everything has shifted to the online space to adhere to this. And actually what mosques are doing instead are acting as charitable services, providing services during this period, and we're seeing this in Birmingham, we're seeing this in London, we're even seeing it at a very, very local level.
Over to you.
And I think what I'll wrap up now, because I know that I'm going really over. I just want to wrap up with this one thing, is that the first 4 doctors who died from coronavirus were all Muslim. All 4 of them were Muslim. If Muslims were truly, not adhering to any of this, and not respecting social distancing and unpatriotic or whatever, then those 4 Muslims who died, the first 4 doctors who died, they paid the ultimate sacrifice serving this country. If that isn't the ultimate act of patriotism, then I don't know what is.
I completely agree, and I'm absolutely sure everybody on this webinar also agrees with you. Thank you so much, Haidar. That was really, really powerful. Hand on to Mark. It's terrible, isn't it, Mark? It's just relentless, the anti-Semitism, and it doesn't take long for the cultural innovators of hate to spin another conspiracy theory. And I think what CST has published has been really, really good. Maybe you will mention that during your chat. But over to you, Mark. Thank you.
Thanks, Cormac. Yeah, I will talk about the report that we issued, and it just builds on everything that Haidar opened with, which is to say that hatreds and conspiracy theories do not begin with coronavirus. Rather, people make the coronavirus fit in with their pre-existing worldview. You wouldn't have had the nonsense about 5G towers if you hadn't previously had it about 4G towers, and about 3G towers probably. We've got we did a report on coronavirus, Jews, and the history of Jews being compared to plague or bacteria. We did it a month ago because we knew that this would exist. We knew if we looked online, we would find it. We knew that it would manifest in hate crimes against Jews here in the UK. So for example, with the 5G, in our report, we show a social media posting. Good morning, guys. Quick update. There are no 5G towers in Jewish areas. I wonder why. It's just entirely typical and predictable. Similarly, you wouldn't have had the demo last week if you didn't have already the anti-vaccination campaign and conspiracy theories. And so it's exactly the same with anti-Semitism, and unfortunately for the Jewish community, as I mentioned before, the association of Jews with plague and bacteria is a very, very long-standing one. The best known example is the Black Death in the 14th century. So 20 million people, approximately, around a third of the entire population of Western Europe, were wiped out by the Black Death. And Jews were blamed for it because people had to explain what on earth was going on, and also how in society at that time, how God could permit it to happen. So you blame the Jews. The Jews were powerful enough and evil enough to kill the Son of God. And the Jews were also responsible, allegedly, for poisoning the wells. So they were put on trial, they were executed, and thousands of them were killed. And entire communities were expelled. And actually that's one of the main reasons why you ended up with so many Jews living in Eastern Europe, particularly in Poland. Then you fast forward to the Nazi Holocaust, and you've got Hitler in Mein Kampf calling Jews a harmful bacillus. Repeatedly in Nazi propaganda, the references to Jews as a bacteria or as a virus. The single most infamous film in Nazi propaganda times, Der Ewige Jude, which depicts Jews as rats spreading their infection across Europe. So this is already set up in the roots of anti-Semitism for it to come against Jews. And in our report, we split up 4 or 5 different types of ways in which it's now being spoken about regarding Jews. And this is primarily on right-wing chat rooms within social media sites. So the first one being that the virus is actually a fake, and this is a Jewish conspiracy, a Jewish conspiracy to mislead the public and to cause an economic crash from which Jews will benefit. It's pretty obvious that the virus isn't fake, that it does exist. So perhaps a little bit more popular than that is the idea that the virus, yeah, it is real, but it's still a Jewish conspiracy. And this idea that Jews want to kill loads of people, well, you go back to the Black Plague, you go back to the history of Jews being accused for just about every war that you could think of, because allegedly we want the other nations to all kill each other while we profit from their deaths, completely rooted in Nazi ideology, how they perceived World War I. And indeed, Hitler's only public declaration that there would be a Holocaust was exactly saying, if the Jews cause another world war, then it will be them that suffer, not the rest of us. So you've got Jews or Israel being accused of trying to make some kind of World War III, or you've got Israel or Jewish or Zionist control of America being blamed for trying to blame China, so that again a World War III has begun, and also, of course, inevitably, so that Jewish business people profit from all of this. And actually, that's been a particularly widespread conspiracy theory in France, but it's in French, so it's not translated into English. So we generally tend not to see it, but it's had a big impact in France. The next allegation that the Jews are primary spreaders of the virus. It's not the Wu flu, it's the Jew flu. And this builds upon actually genuine statistics as to relatively large numbers of Jewish people dying from the virus, which automatically takes you to the next one, which is, of course, celebrating these Jewish deaths, which we see in many places. And then you get to the end point. I think that we have to look ahead, and we have to prepare ourselves for essentially appalling consequences for extremism and racism as a consequence of this pandemic. I don't think the general public has any idea whatsoever at the moment of just how deep the economic damage has been and will be. People might, mock Boris Johnson's thing at the weekend, but actually I think the truth is that there isn't much the politicians can say or predict or do. And the amount of alienation and despair and frustration and then anger and societal division and the need to find scapegoats and the ease with which extremists will feed off this, I think we could be in a very, very difficult place socially and politically.
Thank you.
In a couple of months' time.
Well, yeah, thank you. I think that's a good place, because I think that really is the key warning here. And I think it's the convergence of all of these different strands, and there are links as well between them all. Let me just invite Bhaven to sort of continue the conversation. Bhaven is the director of the Yog Foundation.
Thanks, Cormac. I mean, I won't take too much time, and it's easy to make the mistake that this is a problem at the moment that does not affect Hindus or the Hindu communities in Britain today. After all, the headlines we hear about Chinese ethnicities, and that we heard from Sarah, being targeted, conspiracy theories when it comes to anti-Semitism, the already prevalent Islamophobic instances, but not really issues or incidents targeting Hindus or the Hindu communities. But I'm afraid that assumption would be deeply misplaced. We as a Hindu community do need to work to address this issue more seriously. If I could share an anecdote or two that highlights the problem just very quickly. So for example, there is a thriving Hindu population in Kent, both in the London boroughs and further out near the coast. Just a few weeks ago, a Hindu family's night was disturbed by some racist abuse being shouted at them, and then an explosion that sounded like a bomb. They discovered that it was their car that had been set on fire. And it's a long story, but the police are treating the incident as arson, and the family say there was already a lot of racial abuse being hurled at them since the outbreak of the coronavirus pandemic began. This is not a Chinese family. This is a Hindu family, but their appearance is consistent with Far Eastern ethnicities. So as I say, it would be deeply mistaken for us to believe this doesn't directly affect Hindus or the Hindu communities in some way, because it does. The other concern I have, and as other panelists have mentioned, is that typically with the rise in any form of prejudice, it actually implicitly allows racism of all forms to perpetuate, not just towards distinct groups. So let's take, for example, an incident earlier this month of racial abuse that the BBC covered, because it involved one of their own reporters as she was trying to film her report. Seema Kotecha had to eventually give up trying to film because of the racial abuse. And this was in Leicester city centre. I mean, where we would typically feel at home, just go there and have a look. So whenever there is a rise in xenophobia and racism, it allows prejudiced behaviour of all kinds to surface. So in that sense, it definitely does affect the Hindu communities in Britain today. And as other panelists have said, I think we need to think about the narrative. The politicians are using often to deflect attention from their own shortcomings, as well as the media, from underground to mainstream to social media, in stoking prejudice towards the other. This absolutely needs addressing, but I also think we need to look at the individual, think about the individual. And by that, I mean, yes, of course, tackling the behaviors with appropriate reprimand and punishment. But I think we need to go further than that. In thinking about what's, you know, I like to think about, well, the person involved in the Seema Kotecha incident, what was it about his condition or his circumstance that compelled him to go that far to actually hurl allegedly racial abuse at a filming crew and a reporter? And I don't think simply subverting it or suppressing it is the appropriate response, because it then, as we already hear, it manifests underground, and it needs active steps to address it. So, and then just going further than that, we need to move from hatred, contempt, or phobia to not just tolerance, because tolerance, it doesn't go far enough for me. I think it's respect. And we as minority communities shouldn't be advocating tolerance. It should be respect. And that raises the level of perspective that you look at. look, you don't have to agree with me. You don't have to believe me. You don't even have to like me. But as a genuine and legitimate component of British society, I ask that you respect me as I respect you. And that's the kind of work we need to do within the Hindu community. As I say, further than thinking it's somebody else's problem, because it isn't, you know, I've given examples of that, but also in this understanding of mutual respect.
Got a feeling that Cormac may be frozen.
It does happen.
And I believe that I'm next to speak, unless I'm wrong. Should I just go straight in there?
Yes, please.
Sure. Okay, so I'm Jemma, I'm from Hope Not Hate Charitable Trust. I'm the Deputy Director. I've been given the slightly overwhelming task of speaking about conspiracy theories. So I'm going to try and rattle through. Some of what I say will be slightly a repeat of what other people have said. I'm trying to kind of make the context a little bit wider. I'm going to look at what conspiracy theories are, what the motivation is behind them. I'm going to look at why they're relevant right now, which theories right now are gaining the most traction, some flags to watch out for, and which groups are being targeted by conspiracy theorists, which in some senses we've covered already, so I will try and speed through that section. In terms of conspiracy theories, there's a certain way of thinking where nothing is an accident. There's an underlying truth that's being hidden from all of us, and only the favoured few have worked that out, and there is a way in to find out what the underlying truth is. So it's a conspiratorial mindset has a deep mistrust of authority, deep mistrust of government and the media, but often people who buy into a conspiratorial mindset have a real trust for each other. And that's a real vulnerability for them, because once you take on one conspiracy theory, whether that's anti-vax or that's 5G, you can get pulled in to really toxic views because you're trusting the people in your space sharing ideas with you. Often in a conspiratorial space where people are sharing ideas, people will be quite dramatic in the way they do that. So an example would be right now, in terms of lockdown, people will talk about the last time a government had this much control over its population was in Hitler's Germany. Now, someone will paste something like that on maybe a Facebook group about anti-vax or about 5G, and comments will come into that, which will take you down the route of, well, yes, but of course we don't all know the truth about World War II, do we? And that will lead to, you know, we've been lied to about the numbers, and that will lead to downright Holocaust denial. So someone who's come into that space, who has never really kind of interacted with issues like Holocaust denial, can very quickly get brought in a space where they feel trusted and where they trust the voices around them. Much of the root of conspiracy theories in general through history is anti-Semitic. Mark touched on this very well. Just a couple of ideas that you may have heard about, which can be anti-Semitic and sometimes are not. You may have heard people talk about the New World Order in the last few weeks. It's an idea that first started being talked about probably late 1800s, early 1900s. There are secular and religious versions. The religious version talks about an antichrist who is manipulating groups to cause 7 years of pain, followed by the end of the world. Secular versions are talking about secretive organizations working for hundreds of years all over the world to take over the world. These ideas aren't necessarily anti-Semitic, but you can imagine that once you start talking about secret cabals, you're talking about pulling on ideas from the fake elders of the Protocol of Zion, those kinds of things. The reason it's relevant now is because, like all conspiracy theories, it rises in times of insecurity and rapid social change. The United States in the 60s to the 80s, New World Order theory was very popular. Today we're seeing it in terms of COVID, we're seeing it in terms of the organizations that have been referred to, World Health Organization, the UN. So you're talking about something like the UN has something called the Agenda 21, which is actually an environmental plan. But if you look on conspiracy sites, they talk about, isn't it interesting that UN's got this grand plan that they keep a secret for us? And of course, next year is 2021. Goodness me, is that the year that the world is going to stop, or that the secret cabal is going to take over? And as I said earlier, conspiracy theories are very unlikely to be siloed. So if you look at one theory online, you will encounter layers and suggestions. The connections are part of the mindset behind conspiracy theorists. If there's no such thing as an accident, then something like the death of Princess Diana, it must be part of a bigger plot, and you go looking for the connections. So we touched a little bit on why this is relevant right now, just a little bit more on that perhaps. Right now, there's a huge societal vulnerability. There's no clear answers. The science is running to keep up. People are scared and insecure. And we've seen a lot of resilience to that, but not everybody will be trusting and patient. Some people will go looking for answers, and not everyone will go looking for answers in places where the news is genuine and where the facts are reliable. Those who already have less trust in leaders are most likely to believe conspiracies. So if you already feel that your leaders are not working for you, then you're more likely to be drawn in. Our polling indicates particular vulnerability in younger people, and actually next week we're putting polling into the field specifically looking at 16 to 24-year-olds to find out more about what's happening there, to find out about where they're getting their information on, in order that we can do work in communities to build resilience in the future. Good to know perhaps that every Facebook conspiracy group has grown exponentially during the crisis. Just a real concern that as you get into conspiracy theories, that conspiratorial community will be suggesting new ideas to you. And of course, if you think that 5G is a bad thing, you have to then think, who is behind the idea promoting 5G? And that's where, as Mark again said, that's where often it does take the anti-Semitism track. Who are these secret people promoting these things which are bad for us? There are other tracks. So, for example, there's a big movement blaming Bill Gates for 5G and for COVID as well. So it's not always anti-Semitic, but there's so much anti-Semitic ideology underpinning the conspiratorial community that's often the way it comes out. Same for vaccines. If they're bad for people, why are governments pushing them? What's the underlying secret agenda that hasn't been shared? Just to finish up, perhaps some conspiracy theories that are gaining most traction. We've got that the virus is made up or not serious, that we've got that we're not being told about its origins, we're not being told the correct things about its origins, and that the pandemic is being used to promote liberal multiculturalism. So virus is made up. We've probably all, if we've unfortunately engaged in this work, we've seen a lot of this stuff. We've seen it from the far right and the far left. You've got Nick Griffin on one hand, you've got Piers Corbyn on the other. You've got David Icke, who perhaps gained the most space here, and actually has now been taken off Facebook and off YouTube, although he has found ways to spread his message nevertheless. I think just one thing to say about David Icke is that people think of him as really off the scale loopy, the whole lizards thing. Actually, in recent years, he's dropped a lot of that. He talks much more in terms of New World Order, and he's much more mainstream than perhaps we necessarily think, which is why he's gained traction. In terms of the origins being a lie, that's often the anti-Chinese element coming in, or anti-scientific community. If you've heard of pandemic, that's coming in there. And if, in terms of the anti-liberal multiculturalism, it's the idea that if you think Britain should be homogeneously white and Christian, then you can very easily believe that the British government is manipulating the pandemic nefariously to push a multicultural agenda. So you can see support for the NHS as support for multiculturalism, and you would want to undermine that. You could see celebration of the work of migrant workers and care workers as support for open borders. So in terms of the far right playbook, obviously you're playing straight into things which they can kind of weaponize. So those are those kind of areas which I think are real flags to watch out for. I'm guessing I'm running out of time. Am I right, Cormac? Yeah, okay, so let's leave the groups that are being targeted, because I think we've covered that in other speakers in any case.
Thank you. So I think in the end, with all conspiracy theory, you end up with having to ascribe blame, and as we've discovered in this horrible experience in the Labour Party, sort of lived out on our newspapers, that anti-Semitism is something that punches up, not punches down in terms of racism. It both says the Jews are subhuman and also says that they control everything. But I think I think, you know, we've got loads of people of faith on this call in this conspiracy theory and who to blame and so on. If you're a bishop, it's hard to intervene because, as you said, conspiracy theories are self-sealing. Of course, a bishop would say that. Of course, a senior, you know, head of the Muslim Council of Britain would say that. But if you're a parish priest or you're an imam, you know, is there evidence that local voices or voices that people know or trust, can they break this cycle of conspiracy theory? Are there ways for faith groups to intervene here? Gemma.
Oh, okay. Yeah, definitely. There's definitely space. I mean, I think just looking at some of our polling, we can see that there's a real space for coming together and celebrating solidarity. In the polling we did, showed that in the first 2 weeks of lockdown, 55% of people came out to clap for the NHS. 81% of people said they were impressed with how communities are pulling together, and 37% had bought shopping for family or neighbours. There's a real sense of oneness, and I think we have a real way of capturing that's, you know, that we can make it wider than our own individual faith community, and that we can recognise that we are all in this together. And it's what's going to be really difficult is going to be sustaining that as we come out of lockdown. In a way, it's been easier when we've all been in our own homes and we've actually been able to form street WhatsApp groups with people who we've perhaps never spoken to before. Once we get back to whatever the new normal real life looks like, how are we going to sustain that? That's going to be the biggest challenge. And I think that individual faith leaders have a massive potential positive moment of change for their own communities to sustain that.
So before I just invite everybody else, I think the narrative point that Bhaven made around belonging, I think is really important here, and to sort of break down that feeling of isolation that each community, you know, well, each community is feeling as each person has spoken to. I mean, how have people changed in the Hope Not Hate polling in terms of their attitude towards immigrants, and particularly key workers who are immigrants?
Yeah, huge change there. So we see in June 2018, 45% of people said they wanted to see the number of low-skilled workers from the EU reduced. Polling in April 2020, 77% of EU nationals thought that EU nationals working as doctors and nurses during the crisis should be offered automatic British citizenship. 62% backed also for care workers, 50% for supermarket and agricultural workers, and even 47% for delivery drivers. So again, that's that sense of we didn't realise how much we needed people. And it's really interesting because, I mean, I think, Sarah, you touched on this, but there's such a mismatch between what government legislation is doing right now in terms of the immigration bill and what actually people are really feeling. And that sense of, you know, actually we need this diversity, and we're not bothered by immigration because we see how much we need it, and that we've seen a real shift change. It's a question of how do we capture that and sustain it. That's really the challenge.
I mean, Sarah, you've been involved in the debate of the second reading, and this is not really a criticism of the government. I mean, politicians try and come up with a policy where they think things should be. I mean, what was the mood of that second reading debate in terms of this sense that we see in the polling and every Thursday night, where we have a narrative of belonging that's very different from the salary that you receive, which was, you know, obviously a manifesto commitment in the government's manifesto. I mean, was there evidence of that gap? Is there a feeling across the House, or is it just too early to tell?
I think because everybody's working remotely, it's quite difficult to tell what the feeling in the House is. But today at Prime Minister's Questions, Keir Starmer raised the issue to Boris Johnson, and I think he found it very, very difficult to say how on Thursday night you will go out and clap for carers, yet the same carers that you're clapping for that have come from overseas, you are expecting them to pay thousands in an NHS surcharge, simply because they didn't come from this, they weren't born in this country. And the response, I think, from Boris Johnson has fallen flat, which was that they get £900 million from them. But actually, we've got to challenge the narrative that immigrants bring so much more money than that into the country and are so much more worthy than that £900 million, which Boris Johnson is using to justify that policy position for the NHS surcharge. And when it comes to the immigration threshold, we now, I think, have a job on our hands that this isn't just about, I think, people coming from abroad to work into this country. It's about what we value certain jobs as. And the government have made this mistake well before this crisis, that just because it's low paid, they have equated that to low skilled, and that is simply not true. And I think that that is where we could really push home that message now, that these care workers, I've been a care worker, it was one of the most difficult jobs I've ever had. It was one of the most rewarding jobs as well. But the idea that these people are low skilled, I think really needs challenging. And this goes, I think, beyond necessarily ethnicity and race, but also through to class as well.
If I may, I also think we need to be very careful not to fall in the trap of saying that immigrants are only valued if they have economic value. And actually, one way that faith communities can be involved in doing that is by telling those stories of people who've been involved in relief efforts. So, you know, it's not just what you're doing in the workplace and in the economic sense that makes a difference. And I know there has been some work. I know, for example, the government's anti-Muslim hatred working group has been doing quite a lot of work on telling stories about outward-facing relief work that different faith communities have been doing during the crisis. But I think that you know, we don't value people just because of their economic value. And again, going back to that sense of oneness, you know, are we saying that only economically valuable immigrants are part of Britain? And that's not the case either. So we just need to be really focused on the fact that, you know, contributing to British society and feeling British is something which crosses all boundaries. And it, you know, it's not just about race, and it's not just about country of origin. It can be about disability. There are all kinds of people who are trapped by stereotypes of who is and isn't contributing. We really need to break those down.
Yeah, and I think, you know, obviously Sarah's a Labour MP, but I think this can be in a conservative sense as well, right? It's a sense of, you know, what is belonging, what is public service, and so on. And I think, you know, that there is enormous scope now for thought on both sides, because you know, in a sense, what everyone has laid out is if we don't get into that, how do we keep together through you know, what's coming, as Mark has said, you know, the level of cuts and so on. And just so I am slightly struggling with the technology here, so my apologies. I don't know if Zaki, you can see any questions that have come in from our audience.
Hi, yeah. Hi, Cormac. Yeah, we've had a number of questions, sort of comments. I think some of them have been more around specific things like requesting the CST report, which I believe is available on the CST website. I mean, one of the interesting things that comes from David Say is around countering some of the hateful speech with some sort of more positive remarks. Just trying to find, so for example, we love rice more than racist, love is stronger than hatred. So some of the artwork that appeared on a Chinese takeaway when people saw the racist graffiti. So I don't know, I mean, it comes back to Sarah's point around what we can actually do about what's going on. So perhaps panelists could comment on that.
Yeah, so I just, you know, there's some panelists who've been in this for quite some time, right? I mean, Mark, and then maybe Haidar. You know, Sarah's talked about feeling isolated, right? And you know, lots of senior Jews have been on record about feeling exactly the same. You know, and positive narratives. I mean, what works, what doesn't in this? What, you know, we've got a diverse group on this panel, you know, and listening What works and what doesn't?
Dear. We made a really small, like 2-minute film to go with the report that we did on hatred. And I just find myself saying in it again, I spoke about racism against Chinese people. And I just find myself saying, like that's going to help. We've got all these people out there working together in hospitals, delivery services, all across. I reeled off all of these different sections of society who are all pulling together, doing unbelievable things, because that's actually what people do when you get down to it, when they have to behave because the situation demands it. And I just tried to put the sense of shame on the racists, the sense of idiocy on the racists, because it's so easy to feel isolated. It's so easy to feel that somehow or other you're at fault. It's so easy for you to feel like you should be the one looking over your shoulder and on the back foot. But the whole point of anti-racism and anti-hate, it needs to be the haters who are the ones who are conscious about their behavior and hiding their behavior, not us for being who we are. And that comes down to what was said before about the difference between tolerance and respect. Oh, I'll tolerate you. Yeah, all right, I'll put up with you. I'll tolerate you a little bit more if you work in the hospital, obviously. No, that's not the society that Britain ought to be, that Britain ought to strive to be. I'm sorry.
We need a bigger. We need a bigger, grander narrative. I think back to Bhaven's point. I mean, Haidar, just very quickly, and then Sarah. We need an anti-racism movement, Sarah. But Haidar, just very quickly, what works?
Sure. I think in reality, in terms of messaging, cross-community solidarity is so important. Showing that a lot of the grievances that are felt are shared across communities, even if they might manifest themselves in different ways. And when we do that, what we show, especially to those who are hearing the messages, because not everyone, even in our own communities, are like us. Yeah, and not everyone in our own communities agrees with things that we do, but showing that people from other communities feel the same way and are supportive is a very powerful message. I think better engagement between state and civil society organizations not in a top-down way, but in a horizontal way. And my final point about, I think, what is quite effective is ensuring that it's the right, is that although I agree with Mark about, shaming racists and whatnot, but I think also it's about demonstrating that we understand why some, certain sections of society feel a certain way, and being able to address those in a mature way and actually reclaiming those conversations and having those conversations on our own terms and recognizing that there is solidarity and it's not an us versus them. Sometimes we run the risk of otherizing just as much as we are otherized. I'll stop there.
That's great, Haidar. Thank you. Final word from Sarah. I mean, an anti-racism movement, what can faith communities do to help that happen?
I think it is just as Haidar said, and as Jemma had said, it's not the otherizing or the playing different groups off against each other. And it is showing that solidarity and that intersectionality, because I don't think any of us win unless we all win, quite frankly. And also really championing the work that each other are doing as well. Particularly during this crisis, we've seen really, really inspiring and heartwarming examples of community and a sense of community, particularly in Luton. And I think championing those examples is a positive way of doing it. It won't reach everybody and it won't solve the entire problem, but I think it can at least change the tone and the narrative that's happening at the moment in some spaces.
Thank you very much. So we're just a minute over, so my apologies. But can I just thank all of the panel? It was a fascinating discussion. Tragic, really, really sad that we're having to have it, but really important that we're all coming together to share, empathise, and invite everybody who's watching to think about the actions that they can take, both individually and within their faith communities and within society at large. Just remains for me just to thank Faith Forum for London and also Faith United for organising this, and particularly Zaki and Leon just doing a fantastic job.